If the universe came from a creator, well, that simplifies one thing. But now we have to explain where that creator came from.
No, we definitely don't, because everything apart from God is created.
I'm not arguing that a materialist scientific worldview that excludes the supernatural is a better way to live. One of the things I think atheists have done particularly badly, and one of the reasons that I don't call myself an...
Tucker Carlson has Brett Weinstein, and he debates him on evolution, and it's absolutely amazing. So let's get right into it, guys. I think this is super fascinating.
But I've come to the conclusion that there probably isn't such a creator.
But why?
Because all of the things that we have been able to figure out about the world, things that we know are true because they carry a great deal of predictive power, have come to us through the principle of parsimony. And I will clean up the principle of parsimony a little bit.
Thank you.
Because the way it was originally formulated is clumsy.
I appreciate it.
If we had access to all the information, then the simplest explanation for each pattern that we observe would be the correct one.
Right.
Simplicity is our guide to what's true. And for me, the problem with the hypothesis that there is a creator is that it answers one very difficult problem. Where did the universe come from? At an expense that is vastly greater in terms of the assumptions, right? If the universe came from a creator, well, that simplifies one thing. But now we have to explain where that creator came from. And that's a much harder problem than explaining the universe itself. So as much as I agree, explaining the universe and explaining biology is difficult, it does not solve a problem to imagine that a creator is the answer. And even if there was one, well, maybe that creator was existing in a universe that was created by another creator, but eventually you're going to get to a place where you're going to have to reach for the only explanation we have ever come up with for where radical increases in complexity come from. So even if we, in this universe, are the product of a creator's work, ultimately that creator is going to have come from somewhere, and the only explanation that could possibly work is going to be Darwinian.
How, though? Okay, first of all, he's thinking of like a Mormon type God, that we all have the possibility of gods, and God was once a man just like us, and he became God and created us, essentially. But that's not the God we worship. That's not the God we serve. We serve the God that is outside of space, time, and matter. At the end of the day, if there is no God, there still has to be something that created you. So the universe created you instead of God. Like, that's just saying, then who created the Big Bang? I don't know. What about God?
Again, I'm not saying that I know whether there is or there isn't, but I am saying that the principle that has allowed us to see all of what we can see, that has allowed us to build all that we have built, that principle is parsimony, and it suggests that this universe is not the product of an intentional creation.
So the Hebrews explained it this way, and the Christians too, that the process is inherent in the description. So the creator is the force that creates and is not himself created. So in other words, God was not created. God has always been there, period.
Right. And I see, you can make the question go away, but I don't know what that means. We don't have any example of such a thing. So,
but yeah, that's what makes him God. Like, that's the whole point. He is outside of everything that we can comprehend. Of course, you're not going to be able to comprehend it. And that's difficult for really smart people because they need to understand and comprehend a lot of things.
No, we definitely don't, because everything apart from God is created.
Well, okay, let me take a different tack.
Yes.
Let's just start from the premise that there is a creator who intended this universe and the biota. So I'm a product of that,
right,
in this thought experiment. And in such a case, I know that this creator gave me a capacity to reason. I'm pretty good at it, and so I've invested in it professionally. And he gave me an incredible set of evidence for Darwinian evolution. And I'm now forced to grapple with the question of why a creator would have given me a capacity to reason, would have given me the principle of parsimony, the power of which I can see, and a set of evidence that forces me to conclude that the biota at least evolved in a Darwinian way.
Does it really force you to believe? It's not easy to follow God. It's not even the easiest explanation, I would say. But just because things evolve still doesn't prove the origin of life. Evolution is not about the origin of life.
Now, it could be, let's put it this way. I think the simplest explanation then would be that the creator used evolution to make the biology. And that
a lot of people do think that, besides humans. Like, we don't think like all of a sudden humans like essentially evolved all the way until to what we are right now. Like, no, a chimpanzee is not like a close relative. And you can't tell me that wasn't taught. It was taught. Like, they're a cousin, according to people. And we find more and more studies have shown that we are not as close as what people would think.
You know, maybe the creator is especially interested in the products of a Darwinian process. You know, maybe the creator is as delighted as I am, or because he's the creator, more delighted than I am at the sight of a hummingbird.
I think that is exactly true. Yes, that's what we've seen. He wants his glory to be shown in all of creation.
Marvelous thing to have happened through this process. I could imagine that. It still doesn't strike me as the simplest way to explain the universe that I see. But, you know, if a creator wanted a universe in which biological marvels happened, then the universe might look like this. And it doesn't change what I do. At the point that I know that a Darwinian process is actually the tool that has shaped the creatures, then it makes sense to study it in the way that I do. So, again, I'm not against the idea that there's a creator. I don't see any evidence for it. If there is a creator, I'm pretty sure he must want me to be skeptical for some reason, because he's given me that which would cause me to be skeptical. And I guess the final piece of that argument is that I think that there is a more parsimonious way to understand our universe and the role of religious belief in it, which I know will be grating to many people, especially people who do have a profound relationship with a religious faith. But I think the right way to understand all of the evidence is that religious belief systems are themselves profoundly important products of evolution. They are keys to the amazing capacity of humans.
Or maybe it's because it's been placed in us that we all long to worship something. We all long to put something above ourselves, and that was placed inside of our hearts. Have you thought about that? This is an amazing point. Talking about survival of the fittest, evolution, this goes against everything evolution should be here. Coming up, Tucker brings up human sacrifice. Let's get into it.
Where they strongly imply a story in which there is no literal creator, but they do not tell us that the creator is a fiction, right? Any more than a wing is a fiction. Our belief in God or gods is a key to human functionality, and it is incumbent on evolutionary biologists to understand in what way that could possibly be true. And this is a responsibility on which I think evolutionists have fallen down. They have treated religious devotion as, frankly, a pathology, and it couldn't possibly be one. It's obviously adaptive. And because it's obviously adaptive, it requires the same seriousness that we point at other structures or processes. And so far, there's been very little of that in my field.
I don't think it is adaptive. I don't think there's any evidence of that at all. And I should also...
Yeah, I don't think the Christian religion obviously is probably looked at a little bit different than what it did in, 100 AD, especially in the thousands when, I don't know, people were killing witches or whatever for not believing in Jesus or doing witchcraft. Like, that is something that has changed for sure. But the essential core beliefs of Christianity, I wouldn't say ever evolved.
By the way, and I'll tell you why I think that, but I should say what I said on Rogan was like characteristically inarticulate and imprecise. And I don't have a problem at all with the idea that there's physical evolution, because I think there clearly is. My problem is with the question of the creation of all things. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's a better explanation or a more reasonable explanation that there's just a God that created everything. If you disagree, I'd love to hear it. But let me just say of the question of religion being adaptive. So like one of the main modes of religious expression from the beginning of recorded history is human sacrifice, including, and it goes on today around the world in various forms. And the idea that that's like necessary because population outstrips resources is not always true. Like there are tons of examples, including in modern day, lots of places, including the United States, where there's plenty of resources and people do it anyway. But it's the same story in every civilization, none of which could have had contact with each other that we know of. And there's kind of nothing that evolutionary biology can say about that. It's like it
100%. Why in the world would someone, if they're trying to survive and to, guess what, make their species last, how would killing someone off, your own offspring, how would that help you survive? But people are trying to offer up their kids to fake gods, foreign gods, and the only God to say no is the God of the Bible. People are, you might say, well, they don't do it today. Well, tell that to all the abortions. More babies are being killed now more than ever before. It's sad.
Not helping people at all, and they're doing it anyway.
Well, I look at it differently. I mean, I see the same or a similar pattern. And my sense is in biology, when we see a complex, costly pattern that either re-evolves, spreads, or otherwise persists over a long period of time, we are forced to grapple with the question of what could its utility be.
Exactly.
And while I don't think we have a good hypothesis about the utility of human sacrifice, and personally, morally, I'm offended by it, as I'm sure
me too.
You are.
So is God, by the way.
Nonetheless, like so many of humanity's worst attributes, we have to look at it and grapple with the evolutionary implications, that it does have some sort of a meaning. And I should say, buried within what I'm saying is a critique of where my field has gotten to. As I think I mentioned to you in a past discussion, I think my field is stuck. Yeah. And it's no longer solving big problems. It's focused on producing lots of papers that study some specific, but it's not discovering big new things. And that's not because there isn't lots to be done. It's because it's sort of lost track of how to do it. So I'm not arguing, I'm not a champion of the state of evolutionary biology. I think it's a little it's pitiful. But I am a champion of the basic Darwinian paradigm, which I think we have lost sight of. In fact, evolutionary biologists in the middle of the 20th century overly narrowed our understanding of Darwinism and have blinded us to what it's really trying to tell us about ourselves. And I would love to see us remember how to do the process of discovery and to start,
I strongly agree,
unlocking big puzzles. But it sounds to me like you believe in a universe in which biological evolution happens.
Yes.
Okay, so there's no
And
disagreement.
that people adapt, and that human behavior is to a huge extent a function of physical reality, of biology. And like we do certain things, we have certain attitudes because of biology, because of nature. Like these are imperatives of nature. And so I totally buy all that. I think Darwin thought all that. Here's, I guess, to put a finer point on it, I believe in the existence of the supernatural.
This is where it's very, very difficult for people to comprehend, because there are some things like supernatural that happen and no one can explain. How do you come to grips with that? Like supernatural experiences that a metaphysical world could not even understand or explain.
I've seen it. It's real. It exists outside of nature, outside of all the laws that we think we're subject to, and it acts on us. And human sacrifice is one example of that. So that's my view. I'm totally convinced that that's true. I know that it's true, and so I don't know if there's room in the framework that you're describing for that fact.
Well, what I think I did not articulate properly is I'm not arguing that a materialist scientific worldview that excludes the supernatural is a better way to live. One of the things I think atheists have done particularly badly, and one of the reasons that I don't call myself an atheist, is that there is no demonstrated case in which, an atheist civilization has thrived. In fact, we have many examples in which they have spectacularly collapsed. And
dang, he straight up called out atheists. Let's go. I'm sorry, all the atheists out there. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. But that's amazing. Like, we had this argument. And I've seen other people argue with this. Alex O'Connor, Daily Dose of Wisdom, talking about atheistic society and how they fail. That's insane. He admits that. Because you can't argue for things if you just completely just say, there is no God.
The things that presently threaten our civilization include a great many, atheist ideas, like, you can just up and change your sex if you feel that you're trapped in the wrong body.
There is no God but us.
Right. So
that's crazy.
Program doesn't work very well, at least not as far as we've seen.
I think that's true.
So I'm not arguing that a belief...
No, but I'm not even... No, I know that you think that.
Like, how in the world... Okay, I have a question then for how does evolution evolve to people being attracted to the same sex? How does that help your species survive? Like, that's always something that I have a hard time to understand.
Obvious in how you live, that you think that. But I want to get more focused on just like the reality of it. Like if there is no supernatural, then like what is all this stuff?
Well,
like what's the other explanation?
So I will tell you how I deal with the question personally.
Yes.
Which is I have a category that I don't share with anybody as far as I know that I would call the metanatural. Right? Which is sort of the advantage that comes from believing in the supernatural. I believe it all ultimately could be explained through a natural system in the same way you could explain a baseball game by thinking of all of the atoms in the baseball and the bat and the players. But that's a terrible way to think about baseball, right? It just doesn't, it's not functional. But yes, you could in principle do it. So I think that the belief in the supernatural.
I agree with that, possibly like miracles somehow. Maybe if you could have a video camera of a miracle and then test all of the elements that are going on to cause something to completely change, maybe there would be some way to explain it. But that doesn't prove how did it change? What made it change? We don't. That's something is by the power of God, supernatural.
Is a much more efficient way of encoding hidden truths that you can't readily comprehend. So to give you one example, you might have a system. And
So was his face just completely... I thought it was frozen because his face was just like, sorry.
imagine that the misbehavior of your people, whoever they might be, is going to result in the anger of a God who will punish you with famine.
Right.
Okay, that would be supernatural. It's also true that if your people are busy betraying each other, that may threaten the harvest. In other words, your coordination in the planting of crops, the protecting of those crops, and the harvesting of those crops is dependent on whether or not people like and trust each other. And to the extent that they're backstabbing each other, it could very well result in starvation without the intervention of an intentional God. So to me, those two stories are the same story. How do you explain to people you really shouldn't misbehave because it could interfere with our coordination in a way that may result in us not having enough food to get through the winter? The answer is, God sees what you're doing, and he's not happy about it. And when God's not happy, starvation is highly likely, right? So the metanatural is the category that allows the reconciliation of the efficient narrative description of this process with the difficult to spot deeper physical
I think
connection.
I think that's. I mean, I think there's a practical effect of doing the right thing, and it's a
Obviously.
good thing, right?
Right.
I mean, right. So, but I'm more interested in the question, among others, of like knowing. How do we know things on the basis of no evidence that are true? How do we know?
Well,
but we do know. So that's kind of my point. Is it very often the deepest truths come to us apart from outside of our senses, and we're right.
well, I wouldn't say
Right. And you have to admit, though, there's something that's going on within our conscience, like a mind, a conscience, something that somehow we don't know how to explain it, but it's there, and we all humans have it. And sometimes we get these visions or thoughts that later come to fruition that happen, and you had no idea. How in the world would you know that?
outside of our senses. I would say outside of our consciousness.
Okay.
And so the distinction is like this. Our consciousness is late evolving. It shows up at the end of our evolutionary story, not early. And, that means that there are a good many mammals that have some degree of consciousness that we can see, but nobody's conscious like we are.
Yep.
The conscious mind, I will argue, is actually evolved for an initial purpose. The initial purpose is exactly what we are doing right now. It is the ability for two minds to pool their understanding, right? To actually plug into each other and reach an emergent conclusion that neither of us could reach alone, or that the two of us couldn't reach separately if we couldn't plug our consciousnesses into each other. So when we say, actually, that we know things, but we don't know how we know them, we're sort of talking about our conscious minds, which is just this thin sliver on top of this architecture that has been knowing things for millions of years in ways that weren't conscious at all. So I think it's that interface. Does my conscious mind know why I know this to be true? Why do I meet somebody and have a distrust that turns out to be accurate with respect to their trustworthiness, right? I can try to piece it together. I may get nowhere. And it may be that there's a lot that I actually did perceive. It came in through my eyes and my ears and who knows what else. But it is my conscious mind's difficulty in describing it that feels like my entire mind was handed this piece of information. So to put it another way, we don't do a good job of talking about intuition. In my opinion, intuition is the product of unconscious processes in the mind.
But yes, your brain processes things without you thinking about it. But there are things that are happening that you would have never guessed. That he even he brings this up. Weinstein's thoughts on Jesus Christ. I think this is interesting.
Emerging, right? But I mean, let's take, for example,
But how can we even call it enlightenment? Why is it not just our preference?
let's take the story of Jesus. Okay, the story of Jesus, if I understand it, and I'm no biblical scholar, but if I understand that story, the key elements of it, or at least several key elements of it, involve a broadening of the sense of self, right? A broadening of the in-group. This is what the story of the Good Samaritan tells us, right? This is what the golden rule is. This is, love your enemy. Now, those things are a radical increase in the inclusion of others into an in-group. And the benefits of stabilizing a larger in-group are absolutely tremendous. Now, imagine for a moment that Jesus had said these things in game theoretic terms, and he had tried to convince people with whatever the equivalent of a whiteboard would have been of, the reasons to broaden the in-group at this moment in history. It's preposterous, right? It's not a good argument. Even if it's a true argument, nobody's going to get it. Nobody's going to care, right? So that's not how humans become enlightened. Humans become enlightened because of the power of a narrative that causes them to modify their behavior so that they do function more effectively in light of all of the game theoretic hazards that are always jeopardizing us. Which then answers your other question, I think. Why do the bad patterns, if it's simply good to include others in your in-group, why don't we just simply evolve to default to that and never waver? And
Right.
The problem is that there's a competition between short-term gain and long-term gain. Effectively, the upgrade in which you in-group more people is much better in the long run.
But Jesus just didn't come to enlighten us. He didn't come just to broaden our scope of intellect and to be nice to one another. He prepared us for a relationship with the Father through Jesus. So guys, I thought this was interesting. If you want to watch the entire thing, it will be in the description below. And I really appreciate you guys watching. If you've never decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to do that today. It will be the best decision you could ever make. And in the description below, you'll be able to click a link to help you to do that today.